cannot talk about health, you cannot talk about economics unless you talk about the environment in which you live. Dr. King taught us that we got to look at the soul of America. And in my estimation, the soul of America is the environment. If you destroy the soul, then nothing else exists. If you destroy the air, if you destroy the water, if you destroy the wildlife, if you destroy the plants, that's the soul of America. One of the goals in my life was never to become a pastor. That was something that I was not interested in. When I got married, my fiance then said, two things I never want to marry is a pastor or a doctor because they take too much time away from the family. But having joined the civil rights movement in 1960 with Andy and John and Martin Luther King and all, I was always involved in how do we uplift individuals who are not necessarily the mainstream of society. But mine was always civil and human rights, marching and boycotting and whatever it might have taken. As far as religion and all that, let the holy rollers and let them do their particular thing. We have to deal with nuts and bolts issues rather than talking about let's just get on our knees and pray and God will make a difference and all of that. Even though my dad was a preacher, so I'd grown up in that particular environment. I became a psychologist. I finished all my first 3 degrees in psychology. But then at 40, I said, it's one thing to understand the mind. It's another thing to understand the soul and the spirit, because that's what moves the mind. And it had to be. So I went and got another master's degree in religion at Howard University. And I was asked to come down here to Ebenezer in Atlanta as assistant pastor. And then I found civil rights and the spiritual coming right together. I was not concerned. I didn't know. It wasn't a priority to me about climate change, global warming, melting glaciers, polar bears disappearing off of the planet, carbon dioxide in the air, fracking. I didn't know these words. They were alien to me. And then I met a young lady out in California named Sally Bingham, who had founded Interfaith Power and Light. And I began to grow and I began to see that the major civil rights movement now, civil and human rights movement now, is in the area of climate change and environment and what it's doing to all people. But when I first got into the environmental movement, I would go to meetings, and understandably so, I'd be the only person of color in the meeting. And they were some of the most articulate people that I've met. They were very well financed in many instances. They were very knowledgeable about the environment and what it is. And they would come up and somebody else would say, well, I read a book, I read a report, and I read a study. They were knowledgeable, they were articulate, and they were well-heeled. But you know what? They were dull as dirt. I was almost going to sleep. I said, oh, I can't take any more of it. And then they said, well, when are we going to meet next time? And they'd meet again and do the same thing. They'd meet again. I said, I can't be involved, because there has to be a level of enthusiasm and excitement about what you believe in. So I've spent the last 8 or 9 years trying to bring that level of awareness, showing that faith and science are not incongruent, that they work together. And that's the history. In the African-American community, it has become a reality when you look at the diseases that negatively disproportionately impact those that we're called to serve in terms of asthma, in terms of cancer, like down there in Louisiana. A lot of that was because of the toxic waste dumps and environmental justice issues that they could not mitigate with the law enforcement. So we could use that from the pulpit to tie into, it's one thing to have a heavenly experience, but if you have an earthly disaster, they don't come together. So we had to begin to do that. Pollution and air quality and water was not a priority when you look at rent, when you look at police brutality, when you look at other factors that had to have priority. It was really trying to raise the awareness in the African-American community who were negatively disproportionately impacted by climate change, but yet they were the least amount of polluters. Initially, there was a lot of denial. Well, not denial, but people said, well, we ought to be just glad that we finally got a chance to ride in the front of the bus. So few people believed that climate change was really real. And if it was real, then it would be far in the future. It was not imminent. It was not right here day to day. When I go back to my Christian tradition, all Jesus did was tell stories. They called them parables. But he told stories about the lost coin or the this or the that, and people hung on to it. He spoke to the farmers in farmer language. He spoke to the merchants in merchants language. It's one thing to create something in someone's mind about what will happen, But when they come out of their house and you're going through 60 days of 100-degree temperatures, when you see wildfires going, when you see flooding occurring, when you see that, then you don't have to paint the picture in people's mind. You see, in the pulpit, we paint the picture of what hell is like. But if you're living in hell, then you understand, I don't want to go to hell. Then you can begin to say, these are some of the issues that now we must look at right in front of our face, and how do we begin to change this? Now it comes right back to where we started in the civil rights movement, the right to vote. And then after the right to vote, then to vote, then to vote for what? So then we can come back with the story and say, now let's vote for this because this directly impacts to you, and you understand that because it was in the story that you told. And the stories are true. There were 3 words that made us strong: organize, strategize, and mobilize. It makes no sense to organize and strategize if you don't mobilize. So we're moving into the mobilization phase of the reality of this destructive era around climate and what it's doing to us. Because you see, everything, every word out of your mouth starts with a thought. And a thought gives you your word, and your word dictates your what you're believing in, and your values dictate your behavior, and your behavior becomes your destiny. And if our destiny is victory, we got to start with the thought that we've got to say something and say it so people believe it. I'm so optimistic now because I saw what young people, black and white and different faiths, when they started coming together, they were really talking about the bigger issues of life and lifestyle changes. So I'm seeing them get involved. When I ran track, I was on the relay team. And mine was, I was running second leg, and the first guy would come out, he wanted to get a good lead. Then he'd hand me the baton, and I run my leg of the race. And mine was at least to not fall back and maybe pick up a few yards and then pass the baton on. So I think the story is that I'm merely running my leg of the race right now. Drawdown's running its race right now, and then we pass it on to that next generation. Now that's enough to really inspire you. If you're ever going to cross the finish line, meaning a balanced environment, then we've each got to run our leg of the race. I want to be on the winning team, and the winning team are with winning individuals who believe that we can make a difference. Remember this, never forget this. We're on the winning team.